Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the, frankly chaotic and really tragic, twilight years of Rome's first emperor, Augustus. We're looking at a period that absolutely reshaped ancient history. I mean, this is a time when the man who literally built an empire nearly watched the whole thing crumble from the inside out. In this explainer, we're going to break down the true scale of the crises that threatened Rome, from massive rebellions stretching across the frontiers to heartbreaking betrayals right inside the imperial palace.
So by the year 8 BCE, the aging Augustus is facing a massive existential crisis. He's only got 3 unlikely candidates left to inherit his vast empire. See, the sudden death of his highly reliable general and stepson, Drusus, left Augustus completely despondent. His famously long life was a blessing in some ways, sure, but it also meant he ended up outliving almost all of his original supporters, his friends, and his chosen heirs. So he's left looking at a very short, very flawed list of potential successors.
Which brings us to the central question of our explainer today. How exactly did internal family tragedy, combined with external frontier chaos, push Rome to the very brink? We aren't just talking about minor border skirmishes here, we're talking about massive military operations involving tens of thousands of men, and a dynastic collapse that threatened to completely undo decades of the Pax Romana.
Part 1. The Succession Crisis.
Look at the intense contrast between his options here. On one hand, you have his stepson, Tiberius. Now, Tiberius is a highly capable, battle-tested military commander, but he's also this stern, kind of boorish disciplinarian who often felt totally alienated from the family. Then, on the other hand, you've got Gaius and Lucius Caesar. These were Augustus's 2 young grandsons whom he desperately wanted to favor. But they were essentially spoiled, untested teenagers with absolutely zero command experience. It's kind of like a massive corporate succession crisis, right? Where the board is forced to choose between a highly capable but unlikable veteran executive and the founder's wildly inexperienced teenagers. The true scale of the burden these boys were expected to carry was frankly unimaginable for their age.
Moving to Section 2, Tiberius on the run.
While Augustus is worrying intensely about his young heirs, he couldn't exactly ignore the present dangers. He needed his only reliable commander to go secure the Germanic frontier. The Germanic world was incredibly tense at this time, and after a diplomatic insult from the Succumbri tribe, Augustus ordered a military response. So Tiberius leads the Roman army across the Weser River, subdues the tribe, and then pulls off something staggering. He demonstrates this immense logistical brilliance by resettling 40,000 of the Succumbri on the Roman side of the Rhine in Belgica. Just pause and think about the true scale of that for a second. Moving and resettling 40,000 hostile people using ancient logistics? It's an absolute masterclass in military administration.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how competent Tiberius was. He didn't just fight, he organized. He abandoned the older outposts and established a highly efficient new supply base at Haltern, which ensured reinforcements could deploy rapidly. Ultimately, he secured a lasting peace with a cautious but super effective strategy. And because of this, Augustus lauded his stepson, allowing him to be acclaimed imperator, granting him a triumph back in Rome, and actually designating him consul.
So Tiberius is at the absolute peak of his career, right? But then, just as he gets ordered to handle a brewing crisis on the eastern border in Armenia, Tiberius does the unthinkable. He makes a sudden, shocking decision to retire from public life entirely. When Augustus forbade it, Tiberius literally went on a 4-day hunger strike until the emperor finally caved. Tiberius abandoned Augustus and fled to the island of Rhodes with his astrologer. Now, whether it was resentment over the young grandsons being favored or just a desperate desire to escape his scandalous wife Julia, the result was the same. Augustus was left feeling utterly betrayed and completely alone.
Section 3. Chaos in Judea. With Tiberius gone, the empire's borders immediately begin to fracture. Let's look at how the death of the famous Roman client king, King Herod, in 4 BCE snowballed into a spectacular disaster. First off, Herod dies and leaves this massive wealth to Rome. Second, a particularly greedy Roman procurator named Sabinus tries to pry open the city treasuries in Jerusalem. Third, the locals, rightfully so, riot, and they actually outmaneuver the Romans, trapping them in a massive temple fire and laying siege to the city. Finally, it gets so bad that the Roman legatus, Varus, has to march all the way down from Syria with a massive army of 2 full legions and 4 cavalry units just to rescue the trapped Romans. It was an absolute bloodbath. Revolts were erupting everywhere, with thousands of rebels and veteran soldiers clashing. To restore order after relieving the besieged city, Varus ruthlessly rounds up the rioters.
and to send a terrifying message, he crucifies 2,000 of the most troublesome instigators. 2,000. The true size of this rebellion and the subsequent brutal Roman crackdown really shows you just how fragile the peace in the provinces actually was without strong leadership at the top.
4. The Eastern Frontier. So while Judea is burning in the south, Augustus finds himself entirely out of veteran commanders he can trust for a totally separate crisis boiling over in Armenia. He was so desperate for a dynastic presence out there that he actually sent his underage teenage grandson Gaius Caesar. Keep in mind, Gaius had essentially no military experience, save for a little bit of equestrian training back in Rome. He's sent to face the formidable Parthian Empire, and he has to rely completely on experienced military attachés, guys like Quirinius, to actually run the army for him.
I absolutely love this detail from the source material. Before any actual fighting broke out, the high-stakes geopolitics essentially devolved into a petty, passive-aggressive letter-writing campaign between Augustus and the Parthian king Phraatacis. They just traded diplomatic slights back and forth until a fragile truce was finally reached and a Roman puppet was temporarily placed on the Armenian throne. Gaius even won a bloodless victory out of the whole ordeal and was hailed as Imperator.
Section 5. The Fall of the Grandsons. But man, this fragile diplomatic victory in the East would be the absolute zenith for Augustus's young heirs. What follows is a rapid, heartbreaking collapse of all of Augustus's dynastic dreams. In 2 CE, young Lucius falls suddenly ill and dies in Massilia on his way to his very first military post in Spain. The very next year, violence flares back up in Armenia and Gaius is wounded during a siege. By 4 CE, suffering from infection and fever, a delirious Gaius begs to retire, boards a ship for Rome, but dies on the journey. Both of his chosen successors perished in just a 2-year span.
Rome once again entered a heavy period of mourning. State funerals were held, ashes were placed in the mausoleum, and the boys' silver-gilt spears and shields were mounted on display in the Senate House. Just imagine that for a second, building a global empire from scratch, only to watch every capable heir die before your eyes. The sheer emotional toll on Augustus must have been absolutely unimaginable. He had outlived yet another generation. But with the empire's future at stake and the frontier still simmering, the Emperor of Rome literally had no time to grieve.
6. Tiberius returns to power.
Left with literally zero other options and his grand dynastic experiment totally in ruins, Augustus is forced to swallow his pride. Tiberius gets recalled from his self-imposed exile in Rhodes in 4 CE, and you've got to look at the strict conditions of this comeback. Augustus formally adopts him as his direct successor, sure, but he forces Tiberius to adopt his own nephew, Germanicus, securing the next generation. And Tiberius's return comes right in the nick of time. Germania was revolting again. When he arrives at the front, he's warmly greeted by his old veterans, the Evocati, who had served under him years before. With their old general back in command, the true size and might of the Roman war machine was unleashed once again.
And Tiberius didn't just restore order here, he went on a massive offensive. Through incredibly aggressive campaigns across 4 and 5 CE, he subdued multiple Germanic tribes, crossed the Elbe River, and pushed Roman borders further east than ever before. He established new legionary fortresses, breaking ground at Marktbreit and Carnuntum. He completely surpassed the legacy of his late brother Drusus and started preparing for an unprecedented offensive against the Marcomanni.
Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to take away from our explainer today. Augustus had finally secured his heir, albeit at a terrible, tragic cost. Tiberius was back, and he was winning. But as public discontent boiled over in the provinces of Illyricum and Dalmatia, a new shadow was falling over Rome. Could Tiberius and this totally exhausted empire survive the looming Great Illyrian Revolt, a conflict the Romans would very soon consider their greatest threat since Hannibal himself? Now that is a question of true scale and survival that changes Roman history forever, and we'll have to explore that next time.